The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of the royal district as Captain Marcus Wellington adjusted his ceremonial uniform one final time. The gold braiding on his shoulders caught the early light, and his polished boots reflected the bustling activity around him. Today was the annual Harvest Festival Parade, one of the most important ceremonial events of the year. And as the head of Prince Louis's personal security detail, Marcus carried the weight of enormous responsibility. At 35 years old, Marcus had served the royal family for over a decade. His sharp eyes, trained through years of military service before joining the Royal Guard, could spot potential threats from across a crowded square. He had an unusual gift for reading people, understanding their intentions through subtle body language and facial expressions. This skill had served him well in protecting the young prince, who at 19 years old was known for his adventurous spirit and occasional disregard for protocol. The parade route stretched for 3 miles through the heart of the capital city. Thousands of citizens would line the streets, waving flags and cheering as the royal procession passed by. Prince Louis would ride in an open carriage, smiling and waving to his future subjects. The tradition dated back centuries, symbolizing the bond between the monarchy and the people. However, in recent months, intelligence reports had suggested growing unrest among certain political factions who opposed the current royal policies. Marcus walked through the staging area where dozens of guards were making final preparations. Each man had been carefully selected and thoroughly vetted. Their uniforms were immaculate, their weapons checked and rechecked. The carriage that would carry Prince Louis gleamed with fresh polish, its wheels examined for any signs of tampering. Nothing was left to chance when it came to royal security. "Captain Wellington," called out Sergeant Davies, Marcus's most trusted lieutenant. The stocky man with graying temples approached with a clipboard in his hand. "Final head count shows we have 48 guards positioned along the route, plus the 12 riding with the carriage. The local police have cordoned off all side streets, and we've cleared every building with a view of the parade path." Marcus nodded, scanning the detailed security plan one more time. Years of experience had taught him that the most dangerous threats often came from the least expected sources. A lone individual with dedication and planning could be far more dangerous than an obvious group of troublemakers. He had studied every assassination attempt in royal history, learning from both the failures and successes of past security teams. The prince's private quarters were located in the east wing of the palace, overlooking the royal gardens. Marcus made his way through the ornate hallways, his footsteps echoing off the marble floors. Portraits of previous monarchs gazed down from gilded frames, their painted eyes seeming to follow his movement. The weight of tradition and expectation filled these halls, reminding everyone who entered of the centuries of history contained within these walls. Prince Louis was known throughout the kingdom for his intelligence and charisma, but also for his rebellious streak. Unlike his more reserved older siblings, Louis enjoyed connecting with common people and often pushed the boundaries of royal protocol. He spoke multiple languages fluently, excelled in both academic studies and physical pursuits, and possessed a natural charm that endeared him to everyone he met. However, these same qualities that made him beloved also made Marcus's job considerably more challenging. The captain knocked on the heavy wooden door of the prince's chambers. "Your Highness, it's time for the final briefing before the parade." "Come in, Marcus," came the familiar voice from within. Prince Louis stood before a full-length mirror while his valet made final adjustments to his ceremonial uniform. The deep blue fabric was adorned with silver threading and family crests that had been passed down through generations. A ceremonial sword hung at his side, its jeweled hilt catching the morning light streaming through the tall windows. "You look every inch the future king, Your Highness," Marcus said with genuine respect. Despite the challenges of protecting someone so determined to live life on his own terms, Marcus had developed genuine affection for the young prince. Louis treated everyone with respect, regardless of their station, and never forgot that the people around him were individuals with their own lives and concerns. "Thank you, Marcus. I know you worry about these public events, but they're important to me. The people need to see that we care about them, that we're not just distant figures hiding behind palace walls." Prince Louis turned to face his security chief, his expression serious despite his youthful features. "I've been reading the intelligence reports. I know there are groups who oppose our policies, but I believe that showing ourselves openly, demonstrating trust in our people, is the best way to address their concerns. Marcus appreciated the prince's idealism, even as it made his protective duties more complex. I understand your position, Your Highness, and I respect your commitment to the people. My job is simply to ensure that your noble intentions don't put you in unnecessary danger. We've prepared extensively for today's event, but I need you to promise me that you'll follow our security protocols. The prince smiled, the expression transforming his serious face into something much younger and more mischievous. When have I ever not followed your protocols, Marcus? The captain raised an eyebrow, remembering several incidents where the prince had improvised his own version of approved security measures. Shall I provide a detailed list, Your Highness, or would you prefer that I simply highlight the most memorable occasions? They both laughed, the tension breaking for a moment. This easy camaraderie was one of the things Marcus valued most about his position. Despite the formal requirements of their relationship, genuine friendship had developed between the experienced soldier and the young royal. Marcus saw potential for greatness in Prince Louis, but he also recognized the challenges that lay ahead for someone so young facing such enormous responsibilities. The palace bells chimed 9 o'clock, signaling that the parade would begin in exactly 1 hour. Marcus reviewed the final details of their security plan with Prince Louis, explaining the positioning of guards, the planned route, and the protocols for various emergency scenarios. The prince listened attentively, asking intelligent questions that demonstrated his understanding of the complexities involved in public security. There's one more thing, Your Highness, Marcus said as they concluded their briefing. If you notice anything unusual during the parade, anything at all that makes you uncomfortable or seems out of place, I need you to signal me immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself or assume it's nothing important. Your safety depends on clear communication between us. Prince Louis nodded solemnly. I understand, Marcus. You have my word. As they prepared to leave for the staging area, Marcus couldn't shake a feeling of unease that had been growing stronger over the past few days. Intelligence reports suggested that several known agitators had recently arrived in the capital, though surveillance teams had lost track of their current whereabouts. Additionally, there had been several anonymous threats received by palace security, though none had contained specific details about timing or methods. The staging area buzzed with controlled activity as the parade preparations reached their final phase. Horses stamped their feet and tossed their heads, sensing the excitement in the air. The royal carriage, pulled by 4 magnificent white horses, stood ready at the center of the formation. Guard units took their assigned positions, their movements precise and professional, despite the underlying tension that Marcus could feel among his men. Prince Louis moved through the crowd of officials and security personnel with natural ease, speaking briefly with various individuals and offering encouragement to nervous guards. His presence had a calming effect on everyone around him, and Marcus was once again struck by the prince's natural leadership abilities. These qualities would serve him well when he eventually ascended to the throne, but they also made him more willing to take risks that kept his security team on constant alert. The crowd along the parade route had been gathering since dawn, and reports indicated that attendance would be higher than usual. Families with children claimed the best viewing spots near the palace gates, while groups of young people gathered further along the route, where the atmosphere would be more festive. Street vendors sold small flags and commemorative items, adding to the carnival atmosphere that surrounded royal celebrations. Marcus positioned himself in the lead carriage, directly ahead of Prince Louis's vehicle. From this vantage point, he could observe the crowd while maintaining radio contact with guards positioned throughout the route. His experienced eyes scanned constantly, looking for anything unusual in the sea of faces. Years of training had taught him to identify potential threats through subtle indicators. Someone whose attention seemed focused on security arrangements rather than the pageantry. Individuals who appeared nervous or agitated without obvious cause. Or anyone whose clothing might conceal weapons. The parade began precisely at 10 o'clock, with a fanfare of trumpets that echoed off the surrounding buildings. The procession moved slowly, allowing spectators ample opportunity to see the prince and other royal family members. Children waved enthusiastically from their parents' shoulders, and elderly citizens wiped away tears as they remembered similar parades from their youth. The connection between the monarchy and the people was clearly visible in these moments of shared celebration. Prince Louis played his role perfectly, waving and smiling at the crowd with genuine warmth. He had a remarkable ability to make individual members of the crowd feel personally acknowledged, often making direct eye contact and responding to specific shouts or signs. This personal touch was part of what made him so popular among the people, but it also required him to be constantly visible and accessible, in ways that challenged traditional security protocols. As they progressed through the first mile of the route, Marcus allowed himself to relax slightly. The crowd was enthusiastic but well-behaved, and his guards reported no unusual activity. The weather was perfect for an outdoor celebration, with clear skies and comfortable temperatures that kept everyone in good spirits. Local police had done excellent work in crowd control, maintaining clear sight lines and ensuring that the security perimeter remained intact. However, as they entered the more densely populated commercial district, Marcus noticed subtle changes in the crowd's composition. There were more young men in groups, and some carried signs with political messages rather than simple expressions of royal support. These weren't necessarily threatening, but they represented a different energy that required closer attention. Marcus increased his communication with ground-based security teams, requesting regular updates on any developing situations. The first sign of potential trouble came when a small group of protesters attempted to push closer to the parade route, carrying banners critical of recent royal policy decisions. Local police quickly intervened, maintaining order without creating a scene that would disrupt the celebration. Marcus watched the situation carefully, noting how Prince Louis seemed aware of the commotion but maintained his composure and continued his interactions with supportive crowd members. It was at this moment that Marcus first noticed something unusual about Prince Louis's behavior. The prince had raised his hand to wave at the crowd, but his gesture seemed different somehow. Instead of the broad, sweeping wave that was his normal greeting, Louis was making smaller, more precise movements with his fingers. At first, Marcus assumed it was simply a variation in his waving pattern, perhaps a response to children in the crowd who were making specific gestures. But as Marcus continued to observe, he realized that the prince's hand movements were too deliberate and consistent to be random variations. There was a pattern to the gestures, a repetition that suggested intentional communication. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as he tried to understand what he was seeing. In all his years of protecting Prince Louis, he had never observed this type of behavior during public appearances. The prince continued his unusual hand signals for several more minutes before returning to normal waving patterns. Marcus immediately began scanning the crowd more intensively, looking for anyone who might be responding to or acknowledging the prince's gestures. The implications were troubling. If Prince Louis was communicating with someone in the crowd using predetermined signals, it represented a serious breach of security protocol and potentially indicated a planned meeting or exchange that had not been cleared through proper channels. Marcus activated his radio and spoke quietly to his communications officer. "This is Wellington. I need immediate surveillance review of all video feeds focused on Prince Louis during the past 10 minutes. Look specifically for any crowd members who appear to be responding to hand signals or gestures from the carriage." "Copy that, Captain. We're reviewing feeds now and will report any unusual observations." As the parade continued through the commercial district, Marcus found himself torn between his duty to protect Prince Louis and his confusion about what he had witnessed. The prince appeared completely normal in every other respect, engaging with the crowd in his usual charming manner and showing no signs of distress or concern. Yet those deliberate hand movements continued to trouble Marcus. In his experience, unexpected behavior during high-security events was never coincidental. The second mile of the parade route took them through the historic district, where older buildings created more complex sight lines and potential security challenges. Here, the crowd was somewhat smaller but included many tourists and visitors who were less familiar to local security personnel. Marcus maintained heightened alertness as they navigated this section, but his attention kept returning to Prince Louis's behavior. Then it happened again. As they passed a section where several young people were gathered near a fountain, Prince Louis began making the same deliberate hand signals Marcus had noticed earlier. This time, Marcus was watching more carefully and was able to observe the specific pattern of movements. The prince would wave normally for a few seconds, then make 3 precise gestures with his fingers, pause briefly, and repeat the sequence. Marcus immediately understood that this was not random behavior. Prince Louis was definitely communicating with someone using a predetermined code, and this realization filled the experienced security chief with both concern and professional curiosity. His first instinct was to alert his team and potentially alter the parade route to remove the prince from whatever situation was developing. However, he also recognized that acting too hastily might create a larger problem if the situation was not actually dangerous. The captain made a quick decision to continue observing while increasing surveillance efforts. He radioed instructions to his surveillance team to focus specifically on any individuals in the crowd who appeared to be making similar hand gestures or who seemed to be paying unusual attention to the prince's signals. He also quietly alerted the guards in Prince Louis's carriage to watch for any unusual behavior without being obvious about their increased vigilance. As they completed the second mile and entered the final section of the parade route, Marcus felt the weight of command pressing down on him. Every decision he made in the next few minutes could have significant consequences for Prince Louis's safety and the success of the entire event. He had built his reputation on careful analysis and measured responses to potential threats. But this situation was unlike anything he had encountered in his years of Royal Protection Service. The crowd in the final section was the largest and most enthusiastic of the entire route. This area, closest to the palace, traditionally attracted the most dedicated royal supporters, and the atmosphere was festive and celebratory. Children threw flower petals, and adults sang traditional songs associated with royal ceremonies. Under normal circumstances, this would be the safest and most enjoyable portion of the parade for both Prince Louis and his security team. However, Marcus now found himself scrutinizing every face in the crowd, looking for any sign that someone was receiving and understanding the prince's mysterious signals. The professional part of his mind cataloged potential escape routes and emergency procedures, while another part wondered what could possibly motivate Prince Louis to engage in secret communication during such a public and carefully monitored event. As the parade neared its conclusion at the palace gates, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Instead of simply filing a routine report about the day's events, he would conduct a thorough investigation into Prince Louis's unusual behavior. His years of experience told him that secrets and unauthorized communications in royal security situations rarely led to positive outcomes. Whatever was happening, he needed to understand it completely before it could develop into a more serious threat. The parade concluded with traditional ceremony as Prince Louis's carriage passed through the palace gates and entered the private courtyard, where only invited guests and palace staff were permitted. The prince stepped down from his carriage with his usual graceful movement, smiling and nodding to the assembled dignitaries who had gathered to welcome him back. To all external appearances, the event had been a complete success, with enthusiastic crowd participation and no security incidents. But Marcus knew that his investigation was just beginning. As he watched Prince Louis disappear into the palace for the traditional post-parade reception, the captain made mental notes of everything he had observed, the specific timing of the hand signals, the locations where they occurred, and the prince's overall demeanor would all be important factors in understanding what had really happened during what appeared to be a routine royal celebration. The mystery of Prince Louis's secret hand signals would require all of Marcus's investigative skills to unravel, and he suspected that the answers he discovered might change his understanding of both his duties and his relationship with the young royal he was sworn to protect. The post-parade reception proceeded with the usual formality and grandeur that characterized royal gatherings. Distinguished guests, foreign diplomats, and high-ranking officials mingled in the palace's magnificent ballroom, while Prince Louis moved gracefully from group to group, engaging in the diplomatic conversations that were an essential part of his royal duties. Marcus observed from his position near the main entrance, his trained eyes never leaving the prince, even as his mind continued to process the mysterious hand signals he had witnessed during the parade. The ballroom's crystal chandeliers cast brilliant light across the assembled guests, their formal attire creating a kaleidoscope of colors and textures. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved quietly through the crowd, offering champagne and delicate appetizers prepared by the palace's renowned kitchen staff. The atmosphere was one of celebration and refined elegance, but Marcus found himself unable to fully appreciate the pageantry due to his growing concern about Prince Louis's unexplained behavior. During the reception, Marcus made careful observations of everyone who approached Prince Louis for conversation. He watched for any subtle exchanges, unusual body language, or signs that might indicate secret communication. The prince appeared completely normal in his interactions, displaying the charm and diplomatic skill that had made him popular both within royal circles and among the general public. Yet Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had occurred during the parade that he didn't fully understand. After the reception concluded and the guests had departed, Marcus requested a private meeting with Prince Louis in the library, a room they had often used for security briefings due to its privacy and comfortable atmosphere. The library's tall bookshelves, filled with centuries of accumulated knowledge, seemed appropriate for a conversation that Marcus hoped would provide answers to the questions that had been troubling him throughout the afternoon. Prince Louis entered the library still wearing his ceremonial uniform, though he had removed the formal decorations and sword that had been part of his parade attire. He appeared relaxed and pleased with how the day's events had proceeded, greeting Marcus with the easy smile that characterized their professional relationship. However, Marcus thought he detected a subtle wariness in the prince's manner, as if he suspected that this meeting might involve more than routine post-event discussion. "The parade seemed to go very well, Your Highness," Marcus began, settling into one of the leather chairs that faced the prince's preferred seat near the window. "The crowd response was enthusiastic, and we had no security incidents to report. However, I did observe some behavior during the parade that I'd like to discuss with you." Prince Louis maintained his relaxed posture, but Marcus noticed a slight tensing around his eyes that suggested increased attention. "What kind of behavior, Marcus?" "I thought everything proceeded according to plan. During the parade, particularly in the commercial district and again near the fountain area, I noticed that you were making very specific hand gestures. They appeared to be deliberate and followed a particular pattern, which made me think they might be some form of communication." Marcus kept his tone professional but concerned, watching carefully for Prince Louis's reaction to his observations. For a moment, the prince was completely still, and Marcus could see him processing the implications of what had been noticed. Then Louis leaned back in his chair and sighed, the sound carrying a mixture of resignation and what might have been relief. "You're very observant, Marcus. I should have realized that you would notice something like that." The admission confirmed Marcus's suspicions, but it also raised numerous new questions about the purpose and recipient of the prince's signals. "Your Highness, I need to understand what was happening out there. Secret communication during public appearances represents a significant security concern, and my ability to protect you depends on knowing about all planned activities and contacts." Prince Louis stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens, his silhouette framed against the afternoon light. For several long moments, he remained silent, and Marcus could see that he was wrestling with a difficult decision about how much to reveal. The captain waited patiently, understanding that pushing too hard might cause the prince to retreat rather than provide the information needed to assess any potential security implications. "What I'm about to tell you must remain absolutely confidential, Marcus. Not because it's dangerous or improper, but because it's personal, and if it became public knowledge, it could create complications that would be difficult to manage." Prince Louis turned from the window to face his security chief, his expression serious and somewhat vulnerable. Marcus nodded solemnly. "You have my word, Your Highness. Whatever you tell me will be kept in complete confidence unless it directly impacts your safety or security." The prince returned to his chair, and Marcus could see him organizing his thoughts before beginning what was clearly going to be a significant revelation. "For the past several months, I've been involved in a project that's very important to me personally. It involves working with underprivileged children in the city, specifically those who are deaf or hard of hearing. I've been learning sign language and helping to establish programs that provide better educational opportunities for these children." This explanation began to make sense of the hand signals Marcus had observed, but it also raised questions about why such charitable work would need to be conducted in secret. Prince Louis was known for his involvement in various humanitarian causes, and such activities would normally be publicized as part of his official royal duties. "The hand signals you observed were sign language messages to some of the children and their families who were in the crowd today. I wanted them to know that I saw them there, and that I was thinking about them and their needs." Prince Louis paused, seeming to gather his thoughts before continuing. The reason I haven't made this work public is that I wanted to establish the programs and prove their effectiveness before announcing them officially. Too often, royal involvement in charitable causes becomes more about the publicity than about actually helping the people who need assistance. Marcus appreciated the prince's desire to ensure that his charitable efforts were genuine and effective rather than merely symbolic. However, as a security professional, he was also concerned about the implications of unauthorized communication with members of the public during official events. I understand your motivations, Your Highness, and I respect your commitment to helping these children. However, from a security standpoint, any planned communication with specific individuals and crowds needs to be coordinated with my team in advance. The prince nodded, acknowledging the validity of Marcus's concerns. You're absolutely right, Marcus. I should have informed you about this beforehand. I suppose I was so focused on wanting to acknowledge these families that I didn't fully consider the security implications of my actions. While Marcus was relieved to have an explanation for the mysterious hand signals, he realized that Prince Louis's charitable work with deaf children represented a new dimension of his protective responsibilities. If the prince was going to continue this involvement, security procedures would need to be adapted to accommodate sign language communication, while ensuring that such interactions couldn't be exploited by individuals with malicious intentions. Your Highness, I'd like to learn more about this program and the people involved. If you're committed to continuing this work, and I hope you are, because it sounds like a worthy cause, we need to develop protocols that allow you to communicate safely with the families while maintaining appropriate security measures. Prince Louis's expression brightened considerably at Marcus's supportive response. I was hoping you would say something like that. The truth is, I could use your help in making this program more effective and secure. There are some aspects of the work that could benefit from your organizational skills and attention to detail. Over the next hour, Prince Louis provided Marcus with comprehensive information about his involvement with the deaf children's education program. The project had begun when the prince had visited a school for disabled children as part of his official duties and had been struck by the particular challenges faced by deaf students. Many of these children came from families with limited resources, and their educational opportunities were significantly restricted by the lack of qualified sign language interpreters and appropriate learning materials. Rather than simply making a financial donation or offering nominal royal patronage, Prince Louis had decided to become personally involved in addressing these problems. He had been taking private sign language lessons for several months, working with instructors who specialized in teaching hearing individuals to communicate with deaf communities. His goal was to develop genuine competency in sign language, so that he could communicate directly with the children and their families rather than relying entirely on interpreters. The prince had also been working quietly with educational specialists to develop new teaching materials and training programs for sign language interpreters. This work required careful research and consultation with deaf community leaders to ensure that the programs would actually address real needs rather than imposing solutions developed by hearing individuals without proper input from those who would be affected. The families you were signaling to today? Marcus asked. How did they know to watch for your messages? Was this communication planned in advance? Prince Louis smiled, and Marcus could see the genuine pleasure he took in discussing this work. I've been meeting with several families over the past few weeks, always in private and informal settings. We've developed a simple system of signs that allows me to acknowledge them during public events without drawing attention from other crowd members or the media. Today was actually the first time I'd used these signals during an official parade. Marcus appreciated the prince's thoughtfulness in developing this communication system, but he also recognized the security vulnerabilities that such arrangements could create. Your Highness, while I admire your dedication to this cause, I'm concerned about private meetings with citizens that haven't been cleared through security channels. These interactions, no matter how well-intentioned, could potentially be exploited by individuals who want to get close to you for inappropriate reasons. The prince's expression became more serious as he considered the security implications that Marcus was raising. I understand your concerns, Marcus. I've been very careful about who I meet with and where these meetings take place, but you're right that I should have involved your team in ensuring that proper security protocols were followed. Marcus spent considerable time discussing with Prince Louis the various security considerations that needed to be addressed if the charitable work was to continue. They talked about background checks for individuals involved in the program, secure venues for meetings and activities, and communication protocols that would allow the prince to maintain personal involvement while ensuring that his safety was never compromised. The conversation also covered the eventual public announcement of the program and how to manage the media attention that would inevitably follow any official royal involvement in charitable work. Prince Louis was adamant that the focus should remain on the educational opportunities being created for the deaf children rather than on his personal role in the program's development. As evening approached and their discussion continued, Marcus found his respect for Prince Louis deepening even further. The young royal's commitment to making a genuine difference in the lives of disadvantaged children, combined with his thoughtful approach to ensuring the effectiveness of his efforts, demonstrated the kind of leadership qualities that would serve him well in his future role as king. However, Marcus also realized that protecting someone with such deep personal commitments to social causes would require adapting traditional royal security approaches. Prince Louis was not content to maintain the ceremonial distance that characterized many royal charitable involvements. He wanted direct, meaningful contact with the people he was trying to help, and this desire for authentic connection created both opportunities and challenges for his security team. "Your Highness, I have a proposal," Marcus said as their conversation began to wind down. "I'd like to assign one of my most trusted team members to work specifically on security for your educational program. This person would become familiar with all the individuals involved, understand the activities being planned, and help develop protocols that allow you to do this important work safely." Prince Louis responded enthusiastically to this suggestion. "That would be incredibly helpful, Marcus. I want to expand this program significantly over the coming months, and having dedicated security support would allow me to do much more than I've been able to accomplish working alone." They discussed which member of Marcus's team would be best suited for this specialized assignment. The person would need excellent judgment about people and situations, flexibility in adapting security protocols to unusual circumstances, and the ability to work effectively with civilian volunteers and educators who were not accustomed to royal security requirements. Marcus suggested Sergeant Davies, his most experienced lieutenant, for this role. Davies had worked with various royal charitable programs in the past and had demonstrated the kind of diplomatic skills needed to maintain security without interfering with the genuine charitable work being accomplished. His background in community outreach during his military service would also be valuable in working with the deaf children's families and the educational specialists involved in the program. "There's one more thing I'd like to discuss with you, Your Highness," Marcus said as they prepared to conclude their meeting. "The sign language skills you're developing could actually be valuable from a security standpoint. Silent communication capabilities can be useful in situations where verbal communication might not be possible or appropriate." Prince Louis looked intrigued by this observation. "I hadn't thought about that application, but you're absolutely right. Sign language could be useful for security communication in crowded or noisy environments." Marcus began to envision ways that the prince's sign language abilities could be integrated into their security protocols. Hand signals for different types of situations or threats could provide a discreet communication method that would be invisible to potential troublemakers, while allowing the prince to convey important information to his protective detail. This realization transformed what had initially appeared to be a security concern into a potential security asset. Rather than representing unauthorized communication that needed to be restricted, Prince Louis's sign language skills could become part of an enhanced security communication system that would actually improve their ability to protect him during public appearances. As they concluded their meeting, Marcus felt a sense of satisfaction about how the day's mystery had been resolved. What had begun as concern about potentially dangerous secret communication had evolved into an opportunity to support meaningful charitable work while enhancing security capabilities. The investigation had revealed not a threat to Prince Louis's safety, but rather another dimension of his character that made him worthy of the loyalty and protection that Marcus was proud to provide. The next morning, Marcus began implementing the security protocols they had discussed for Prince Louis's educational program. He arranged for background checks on all program participants, established secure meeting locations within the palace complex, and began working with Sergeant Davies to develop specialized security procedures for charitable activities that required direct interaction with civilian families. Marcus also began his own study of basic sign language, Recognizing that understanding this communication method would enhance his ability to monitor the prince's interactions and ensure that no unauthorized messages were being exchanged during public appearances. The learning process proved more challenging than he had expected, giving him increased respect for Prince Louis's dedication to mastering these skills for his charitable work. The investigation of the mysterious hand signals had concluded successfully, but Marcus realized that it had also opened up new areas of responsibility and opportunity for his security team. Protecting Prince Louis would continue to require adaptation and innovation, as the young royal developed new interests and commitments that reflected his genuine desire to serve his future subjects in meaningful ways. 3 weeks after the parade incident, Marcus found himself standing in the converted classroom within the palace's east wing, watching Prince Louis conduct his first official sign language lesson with a group of deaf children and their families. The room had been carefully selected for both its accessibility and security features, with multiple exit routes and clear sight lines that allowed the assigned security personnel to maintain proper protection without interfering with the educational activities. The transformation in Prince Louis's confidence and skill since their initial conversation was remarkable. Marcus observed as the prince moved naturally between sign language and spoken communication, seamlessly including both deaf and hearing family members in group discussions about educational goals and challenges. The children, ranging in age from 6 to 16, responded to the prince with genuine enthusiasm that had nothing to do with his royal status and everything to do with his authentic commitment to their needs. Sergeant Davies had proven to be an excellent choice for managing security aspects of the educational program. His military background and experience with community outreach had prepared him well for working with civilian families while maintaining appropriate protective protocols. More importantly, his natural warmth and patience had quickly earned the trust of both parents and children, making security measures feel like helpful support rather than restrictive surveillance. Captain Wellington called Sarah Chen, the program's lead educational specialist, as she approached Marcus during a break in the lesson activities. "I wanted to thank you again for how smoothly the security arrangements have been working. The families were initially quite nervous about meeting at the palace, but your team has made everyone feel welcome and safe." Marcus appreciated the feedback from Dr. Chen, whose credentials in deaf education and sign language instruction had been thoroughly vetted before Prince Louis had hired her to help develop the program's curriculum. Her expertise had been crucial in ensuring that the prince's good intentions were translated into effective educational practices that would genuinely benefit the participating children. "We're committed to supporting His Highness's charitable work," Marcus replied, continuing to observe the interactions between Prince Louis and the program participants. Has the prince's sign language ability progressed to the level where he can handle complex educational discussions? Dr. Chen smiled as she watched Prince Louis help a 10-year-old boy with a particularly challenging mathematical concept, using a combination of sign language and visual aids to ensure clear communication. His progress has been extraordinary. Most hearing adults take years to develop the kind of fluency he's achieved in just a few months. What's even more impressive is his understanding of deaf culture and communication norms. He's not just learning the mechanical aspects of sign language, he's developing genuine cultural competency. This observation aligned with Marcus's own assessment of Prince Louis's approach to the educational program. The prince had invested considerable time in learning not just sign language, vocabulary, and grammar, but also the social and cultural context that made communication meaningful within deaf communities. He had read extensively about the history and challenges of deaf education and had sought advice from deaf community leaders about how hearing individuals could most effectively provide support. Marcus noticed that several of the children had begun using specific hand signals when they wanted to get Prince Louis's attention, signals that appeared to be variations on the ones he had observed during the parade. However, these were clearly part of the normal educational communication rather than secret messages, and their use was open and obvious to everyone in the room. "Dr. Chen?" Marcus asked. "Could you help me understand the specific signs that Prince Louis uses when he wants to acknowledge deaf children in public settings? I want to make sure that my security team can recognize these as appropriate educational communication rather than potential security concerns." Dr. Chen was happy to provide this information, and she spent several minutes teaching Marcus the basic signs that Prince Louis used for greetings, encouragement, and simple educational concepts. The demonstration helped Marcus understand that what he had initially perceived as mysterious secret communication was actually a standardized form of educational interaction that was well known within deaf communities. As the lesson continued, Marcus observed the remarkable transformation that occurred when deaf children were able to communicate directly with an adult authority figure without requiring interpreters or written communication. The confidence and engagement displayed by even the shyest children when Prince Louis addressed them in their preferred language was a powerful demonstration of the program's value. One particularly moving moment occurred when a teenage girl named Emma, who had been described by her parents as extremely withdrawn due to difficulties with communication at her regular school, began an animated discussion with Prince Louis about her interest in mathematics and science. Using rapid and complex sign language that Marcus couldn't follow, she explained her dream of becoming an engineer and her frustration with educational systems that didn't provide adequate support for deaf students pursuing technical careers. Prince Louis listened intently to Emma's concerns and then responded with information about specialized programs and scholarship opportunities that might help her achieve her educational goals. Marcus could see the immediate impact of this interaction on both Emma and her parents, who had been struggling to find appropriate resources to support their daughter's academic ambitions. After the lesson concluded and the families had departed, Marcus joined Prince Louis and Dr. Chen for a debriefing session about the program's progress and future development plans. These regular evaluation meetings had become an important part of ensuring that the educational activities remained focused and effective while maintaining appropriate security protocols. The enrollment requests continue to exceed our capacity, Dr. Chen reported. We've received inquiries from 43 families interested in participating in the program. But our current resources can only accommodate about 20 children effectively. Prince Louis nodded thoughtfully as he considered the implications of the program's growing popularity. What would we need to expand capacity while maintaining the quality of instruction and individual attention that makes this program effective? The discussion that followed involved detailed consideration of space requirements, additional staffing needs, and the financial resources necessary to support a larger program. Marcus contributed practical input about security implications of different expansion options, helping to ensure that growth plans could be implemented without compromising safety or creating logistical complications. There's another factor we need to consider, Marcus added as the planning discussion continued. The more successful and visible this program becomes, the more likely it is to attract public and media attention. We should be prepared for the eventual need to manage publicity while protecting the privacy of participating families. Prince Louis had been thinking about this issue as well. I want to be very careful about how we handle any public announcements about the program. The focus should always be on the educational opportunities we're creating and the achievements of the children, not on my personal involvement or royal patronage. Chen supported this approach, explaining that many deaf families had previous negative experiences with media coverage that focused more on the novelty of their communication methods than on their actual needs and accomplishments. Any publicity strategy would need to be developed in consultation with deaf community leaders to ensure that it represented their perspectives accurately and respectfully. As they discussed expansion plans and publicity considerations, Marcus realized that Prince Louis's educational program had evolved into something much more significant than a personal charitable project. The prince had unknowingly positioned himself at the forefront of important advocacy work for deaf education rights, and the success of his program could influence policy decisions about educational resources and accessibility requirements throughout the kingdom. This realization brought both opportunities and additional security considerations. If Prince Louis became publicly identified as a leading advocate for deaf education reform, it could enhance his reputation as a socially conscious future leader. But it might also make him a target for groups opposed to increased government spending on special education programs. Marcus made a mental note to research any organized opposition to deaf education funding or accessibility requirements that might view Prince Louis's advocacy work as threatening to their positions. While such opposition was unlikely to pose physical threats, It could result in protests or other public demonstrations that would require security planning. The conversation was interrupted when Sergeant Davies knocked on the door to report an urgent message from Palace Communications. "Captain, we've received a call from the Royal Press Office. There's been a leak of information about Prince Louis's sign language lessons, and several media outlets are preparing stories about the educational program." Prince Louis's expression showed concern rather than surprise at this development. "I suppose it was inevitable that word would get out eventually. Too many people were involved for us to maintain complete secrecy indefinitely." Marcus immediately shifted into crisis management mode, considering the various implications of premature media disclosure and the steps needed to control the narrative around Prince Louis's charitable work. "Your Highness, we need to make some quick decisions about how to respond to media inquiries and whether to provide official statements or allow the story to develop without royal comment." The next several hours involved intensive consultation with palace press officers, legal advisors, and Dr. Chen about the most appropriate response to the emerging media attention. Prince Louis insisted that any official statements should emphasize the educational program's goals and achievements rather than his personal role, and that participating families should have complete control over whether their involvement was publicly disclosed. Dr. Chen worked to contact all participating families to inform them about the media attention and to discuss their preferences about privacy and publicity. Most families expressed support for public awareness of the program, but requested that their children's names and specific circumstances not be disclosed without explicit permission. The media response strategy that eventually emerged from these consultations reflected Prince Louis's commitment to responsible advocacy while protecting the privacy and dignity of program participants. Official statements would focus on the importance of deaf education resources and the innovative teaching methods being developed through the program, with minimal emphasis on royal involvement beyond acknowledging Prince Louis's personal interest in educational accessibility issues. Marcus coordinated with palace security to prepare for increased media attention around Prince Louis's public appearances, including the possibility that sign language communication with deaf community members might now attract camera attention and requests for interviews. Security protocols were updated to protect participating families from unwanted media intrusion while allowing continued program activities. The first media stories about Prince Louis's sign language education program appeared 3 days later, and the coverage was generally positive and respectful. Several articles highlighted the innovative teaching methods being developed and included interviews with deaf education advocates who praised the program's approach to community engagement and cultural competency. However, Marcus also noted that some coverage focused more on the novelty of a royal family member learning sign language than on the actual educational issues the program was addressing. This type of coverage, while not hostile, represented the kind of publicity that Prince Louis had hoped to avoid by keeping the program private until it was more fully established. The media attention did result in significantly increased interest in the program from both potential participants and individuals wanting to volunteer or provide financial support. Dr. Chen reported receiving dozens of inquiries from deaf families, educational specialists, and community organizations interested in collaborating or replicating the program's methods. Prince Louis decided to use the unexpected publicity as an opportunity to advocate more broadly for deaf education resources and accessibility improvements. He worked with Dr. Chen and deaf community leaders to develop a series of public statements that used media interest in his personal involvement to highlight systemic issues affecting deaf education throughout the kingdom. "If the media attention is inevitable," Prince Louis explained to Marcus during one of their regular security briefings, "then I want to make sure it serves a useful purpose in raising awareness about issues that truly matter to the deaf community." This decision to embrace advocacy rather than simply managing the publicity represented a significant evolution in Prince Louis's approach to his charitable work. Marcus recognized that the prince was transitioning from private philanthropy to public leadership on social justice issues, a development that would require corresponding changes in security planning and public engagement protocols. The increased visibility also meant that Prince Louis's sign language communication would now be subject to public observation and interpretation during official appearances. Marcus worked with Dr. Chen to develop guidelines for appropriate public use of sign language that would allow the prince to acknowledge deaf community members without creating confusion or misunderstanding among other observers. As the media coverage continued over the following weeks, Marcus observed that Prince Louis had successfully transformed a potential publicity problem into an opportunity for meaningful advocacy. The prince's thoughtful and respectful approach to discussing deaf education issues had earned praise from community leaders and had helped focus public attention on substantive policy questions rather than merely the novelty of royal sign language skills. The investigation that had begun with mysterious hand signals during a parade had evolved into something much more significant than Marcus had initially anticipated. Prince Louis's commitment to deaf education had become a defining aspect of his public service and had positioned him as a serious advocate for social justice issues that would likely continue to be important throughout his future reign. 6 months after the initial parade incident, Marcus stood in the newly established Deaf Education Center that had been created within the palace grounds, specifically to house Prince Louis's expanded educational program. The former staff quarters had been completely renovated to provide state-of-the-art facilities for sign language instruction, specialized learning technologies, and family support services that served nearly 100 deaf children from across the kingdom. The center represented the remarkable growth that had occurred since the media attention had transformed Prince Louis's private charitable project into a nationally recognized model for inclusive education. Funding had come from both royal resources and public donations, with additional support from educational foundations and disability rights organizations that had embraced the program's innovative approach to community engagement. Chen now supervised a staff of 12 specialists, including deaf educators, sign language interpreters, family counselors, and technology experts, who worked together to provide comprehensive services that addressed not just educational needs, but also the social and emotional challenges faced by deaf children and their families. The program had become a research center that was developing new teaching methods and materials that were being adopted by schools throughout the kingdom. Marcus watched through the observation window as Prince Louis conducted a weekly leadership workshop for teenage program participants, using advanced sign language to discuss current events, ethical decision-making, and civic engagement. His fluency had progressed to the point where he could handle complex philosophical discussions entirely in sign language, and his understanding of deaf culture had deepened through ongoing relationships with community leaders and activists. The security arrangements for the expanded program had required significant innovation and adaptation. Marcus had developed protocols that protected participating families while allowing for the open communication and community building that made the educational activities effective. Background checks were conducted discreetly, security measures were integrated seamlessly into the facility design, and staff training ensured that protective protocols enhanced rather than hindered the program's educational mission. Captain Wellington called Thomas Mitchell, a 16-year-old who had become one of the program's most accomplished student leaders. Thomas had been deaf since birth and had struggled academically until joining Prince Louis's program, where specialized instruction and peer support had allowed him to excel in mathematics and science while developing strong leadership skills. Thomas was approaching with several other teenage participants who had been working on a special project that combined their academic studies with community service. Their initiative involved teaching basic sign language to hearing children at local elementary schools, helping to create more inclusive environments where deaf and hearing children could communicate more effectively. "We wanted to show you the presentation we're preparing for the Education Ministry," Thomas continued, his rapid sign language accompanied by one of the program's interpreters, for Marcus's benefit. "Prince Louis helped us understand how to present our research findings in ways that policymakers can use to improve educational programs throughout the country." Marcus was continually impressed by the sophistication of the work being produced by program participants under Prince Louis's guidance. The prince had encouraged the older students to become advocates for their own educational needs rather than simply recipients of charitable services, and their research and advocacy efforts were beginning to influence policy discussions at the highest levels of government. The presentation that Thomas and his team had prepared documented the academic progress achieved by deaf students when provided with appropriate instructional support and inclusive learning environments. Their data showed dramatic improvements in both academic achievement and social confidence among program participants, with several students advancing from below grade level performance to academic excellence within a single year. More significantly, the students had also documented the positive impact of their community outreach efforts on hearing children and adults who had learned to communicate in sign language. Their research demonstrated that inclusive communication training benefited everyone involved, creating more empathetic and connected communities while reducing social isolation for deaf individuals and families. Prince Louis joined the group as they prepared for their presentation, offering suggestions about how to structure their arguments and respond to potential questions from government officials. Marcus observed the natural teaching relationship that had developed between the prince and the program participants, noting how Louis balanced his role as a supportive mentor with respect for the students' independent thinking and leadership abilities. "Your research methodology is very strong," Prince Louis told the students, his sign language now flowing as naturally as his spoken communication. "The Education Ministry will be particularly interested in your cost-benefit analysis showing that early intervention and inclusive instruction actually reduce long-term educational expenses while improving outcomes for all students." Marcus had learned enough basic sign language over the past months to follow simple conversations, and he was struck by how the visual nature of the communication seemed to enhance the clarity and precision of discussions about complex topics. The students and Prince Louis used spatial relationships, facial expressions, and gesture patterns that conveyed nuances of meaning that were often difficult to capture in spoken language. The success of the educational program had also created new opportunities for Prince Louis to engage with international deaf education leaders and disability rights advocates. Marcus had coordinated security for several visits by foreign experts who had come to study the program's methods and discuss collaboration opportunities with universities and research institutions worldwide. These international connections had enhanced Prince Louis's understanding of global disability rights issues and had positioned him as an emerging leader in accessibility advocacy. His speeches and public statements about educational inclusion were now being quoted by activists and policymakers in other countries, and he had been invited to participate in several international conferences about disability rights and educational innovation. However, the increased visibility and advocacy work had also created new security challenges that Marcus had to address. Opposition to increased funding for special education programs had become more organized and vocal as Prince Louis's influence on policy discussions had grown. While most criticism remained focused on budgetary concerns rather than personal attacks, Marcus maintained careful surveillance of groups that might view the prince's advocacy work as threatening to their interests. One particular concern involved a political organization that opposed government spending on what they characterized as special interest educational programs. Their public statements about Prince Louis's work had become increasingly personal and critical, suggesting that royal involvement in policy advocacy was inappropriate and that the educational program represented wasteful spending on unnecessary services. Marcus had briefed Prince Louis about these criticisms and the potential for them to escalate into more serious opposition or public demonstrations. The prince's response had been characteristically thoughtful and principled, expressing willingness to engage in public debate about educational policies while maintaining his commitment to advocacy for deaf children and families. "I understand that not everyone agrees with our approach," Prince Louis had said during one of their security briefings. "But I believe that when we have evidence that specific programs improve children's lives and educational outcomes, we have a responsibility to support those programs regardless of political opposition." This principled stance had earned Prince Louis considerable respect among disability rights advocates and educational professionals. But it had also made him a more visible target for political opposition. Marcus had increased security measures around public appearances where the prince discussed educational policy and had developed contingency plans for managing protests or other disruptive activities. The most serious security incident had occurred during a public forum about educational funding, where a small group of protesters had attempted to disrupt Prince Louis's presentation about the deaf education program's achievements. The protesters had been quickly removed by security personnel, but the incident had demonstrated the need for enhanced protective measures during advocacy-focused public appearances. Despite these challenges, Prince Louis had remained committed to public engagement and advocacy work, refusing to allow security concerns to limit his ability to discuss important policy issues. Marcus respected this commitment while working to ensure that the prince's advocacy activities could continue safely and effectively. The relationship between Marcus and Prince Louis had evolved significantly over the months since the mysterious hand signals had first raised security concerns. What had begun as a professional relationship between protector and protectee had developed into a genuine partnership in support of meaningful social change. Marcus found himself not just protecting Prince Louis physically, but also helping to facilitate the prince's ability to make a positive impact on important social issues. This evolution had required Marcus to expand his understanding of his security responsibilities, beyond traditional threat assessment and protective protocols. He now needed to understand policy debates, advocacy strategies, and community engagement methods in order to provide effective security support for Prince Louis's expanding role as a social justice leader. The transformation had been professionally challenging but deeply rewarding for Marcus, who took pride in supporting work that was making a genuine difference in the lives of disadvantaged children and families. His own sign language skills had improved considerably, and he had developed relationships within the deaf community that enhanced his ability to provide appropriate security while respecting cultural norms and communication preferences. The deaf education program had also influenced changes in security protocols throughout the Royal Protection Service. Other members of Marcus's team had received basic sign language training, and security procedures had been adapted to accommodate the communication needs of deaf individuals who participated in various royal events and activities. As Marcus observed the final preparations for the students' presentation to the Education Ministry, he reflected on how dramatically his understanding of his protective duties had expanded since that puzzling parade day when he had first noticed Prince Louis's unusual hand signals. What had initially appeared to be a potential security threat had evolved into one of the most meaningful and impactful aspects of Prince Louis's public service. The investigation that had begun with concern about secret communication had ultimately revealed the depth of Prince Louis's commitment to social justice and his willingness to use his position and influence to address important societal problems. Marcus now understood that protecting someone with such deep convictions and active engagement with social issues required not just traditional security skills, but also the ability to support and facilitate meaningful advocacy work. The mysterious hand signals had been solved, but their discovery had opened up much larger questions about the role of royal leadership in addressing social problems and the responsibility of security personnel to support beneficial social change rather than simply maintaining the status quo. Marcus had found satisfying answers to these questions through his involvement in Prince Louis's educational advocacy work, and he looked forward to continuing to support the prince's evolving role as a leader committed to making a positive difference in his future subjects' lives. The presentation that Thomas and his fellow students would deliver to the Education Ministry represented not just their individual academic achievements, but also the broader impact of Prince Louis's commitment to transforming charitable impulses into systematic social change. Marcus took pride in having played a role in facilitating this important work, and he was confident that the security protocols they had developed would continue to support Prince Louis's advocacy efforts as they expanded and evolved in the years ahead. 1 year after the parade that had started everything, Marcus stood once again along the same ceremonial route, but this time the circumstances were entirely different. Prince Louis was preparing for another public appearance, but now his sign language communication was not a secret to be investigated, but rather a celebrated aspect of his public service that had transformed educational opportunities for deaf children throughout the kingdom. A Periton of the Deafigation Center has been expanded to include a special section celebrating educational achievement and community inclusion. A decorated float carried students from the Deaf Education Center, who would demonstrate their academic accomplishments and leadership skills to the thousands of spectators lining the streets. Prince Louis would ride alongside them, serving not as a distant royal figure, but as a genuine partner in their educational journey and advocacy work. Marcus watched as Prince Louis conducted final preparations with the student participants, using fluent sign language to review their presentation plans and ensure that everyone felt confident and prepared for the public attention they would receive. The prince's communication skills had advanced to the level where he could handle complex discussions about educational policy, scientific research, and civic engagement entirely in sign language without requiring any interpretive support. The transformation in both Prince Louis and the students over the past year had been remarkable. What had begun as a small private tutoring program had evolved into a comprehensive educational initiative that was influencing policy decisions not just within the kingdom but internationally. Educational researchers from universities around the world had studied the program's methods, and several countries had requested assistance in developing similar initiatives for their deaf student populations. Thomas Mitchell, the young man who had become one of the program's most accomplished advocates, approached Marcus with a confident smile that reflected how much his self-assurance had grown through his involvement in educational leadership activities. At 17, Thomas was now fluent in 3 sign languages and had been accepted to study engineering at the kingdom's most prestigious university, with a full scholarship that recognized his academic achievements and leadership potential. Captain Wellington, Thomas signed, his movements precise and expressive. Prince Louis wanted me to thank you again for all the security support that made our program possible. Without your help in creating safe spaces for our families and our work, none of this would have happened. Marcus felt genuine pride in receiving this recognition from someone whose life had been so positively impacted by the educational opportunities that had grown from what had initially appeared to be a security concern. It's been my honor to support this work, Thomas. Watching you and the other students develop your leadership skills and academic abilities has been one of the most rewarding aspects of my career. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Chen and several other educational specialists who had come to make final preparations for the parade presentation. The team now included researchers from multiple universities, policy advocates from disability rights organizations, and community leaders from deaf communities across the kingdom who had collaborated in expanding the program's reach and impact. Dr. Chen reported on the latest enrollment statistics and program outcomes that would be shared with the public during the parade presentation. The Deaf Education Center was now serving over 300 students from across the kingdom, with satellite programs operating in 6 additional cities. Academic achievement data showed that participating students were outperforming their peers in traditional educational settings, and longitudinal research was documenting improved social integration and leadership development among program graduates. More significantly, the program's advocacy work had resulted in substantial policy changes that benefited all deaf students throughout the kingdom. New legislation required schools to provide qualified sign language interpreters, mandated accessibility accommodations in educational facilities, and established funding for specialized teacher training programs. These changes had been directly influenced by the research and advocacy efforts of Prince Louis and the student participants in the educational center. Prince Louis joined the group for a final briefing about the day's activities, his presence commanding immediate attention despite the informal and collaborative atmosphere that characterized his interactions with program staff and participants. Marcus observed how naturally the prince moved between his roles as educational partner, policy advocate, and royal representative, maintaining appropriate dignity while engaging authentically with everyone involved in the program. Today represents not just a celebration of what we've accomplished together, Prince Louis addressed the assembled group, but also an opportunity to demonstrate to the public how inclusion and accessibility benefit everyone in our society. The research you've conducted and the leadership you've demonstrated prove that when we remove barriers and provide appropriate support, every individual can achieve remarkable things. The prince's comments reflected the sophisticated understanding of disability rights and educational policy that he had developed through his intensive involvement in the program. His advocacy work had evolved far beyond charitable gestures to encompass serious engagement with complex social justice issues that required both emotional intelligence and analytical rigor. As the parade preparations reached their final stage, Marcus reviewed the security arrangements that had been developed specifically to protect the program participants while allowing them to engage freely with the public. The protocols represented a careful balance between safety requirements and the educational mission of demonstrating how deaf individuals could participate fully in community celebrations and civic activities. The security team now included several members who had developed sign language skills specifically to support their protective duties during program-related activities. This investment in specialized training had not only enhanced security effectiveness but had also demonstrated the Royal Guard's commitment to inclusive practices that respected the communication preferences and cultural norms of the deaf community. Marcus positioned himself strategically along the parade route where he could monitor both the crowd response and the activities on the educational float. His experienced eyes scanned for potential problems, while also observing the positive public reaction to the program's presentation. The crowd's enthusiasm was genuine and supportive, with many spectators attempting their own basic sign language greetings to acknowledge the student participants. As the parade procession moved through the city streets, Marcus was struck by how different this experience was from the mysterious hand signals that had concerned him exactly 1 year earlier. Prince Louis's sign language communication was now open and celebrated, serving as a bridge between the royal family and an important community that had historically been marginalized from mainstream civic participation. The students on the educational float demonstrated various aspects of their academic work, including scientific experiments, mathematical problem-solving, and historical research presentations that they delivered entirely in sign language. Their confidence and expertise were evident to everyone watching, effectively challenging any lingering assumptions about the capabilities of deaf students when provided with appropriate educational support. Prince Louis moved naturally between sign language and spoken communication as he interacted with both the program participants and the crowd along the parade route. His fluency allowed him to serve as an effective bridge between deaf and hearing communities, facilitating communication and understanding that would have been impossible without his dedicated language learning and cultural education. The positive public response to the educational presentation exceeded everyone's expectations. Local media coverage focused on the students' academic achievements and leadership development, rather than simply the novelty of royal sign language use. Editorial commentary praised the program's evidence-based approach to educational policy advocacy and highlighted the broader social benefits of inclusive communication practices. More importantly, the parade presentation generated immediate practical results for deaf education advocacy. Several school districts announced plans to expand their sign language instruction programs, and the Education Ministry reported increased funding requests for accessibility improvements in educational facilities. The visibility provided by the parade had translated directly into policy momentum that would benefit deaf students throughout the kingdom. Following the parade's conclusion, Marcus attended the traditional reception where program participants had the opportunity to meet with government officials, educational leaders, and policymakers who had been impressed by the presentations they had witnessed. These informal conversations often resulted in concrete commitments to expand educational opportunities and remove barriers that limited deaf students' academic and professional development. Prince Louis moved easily through the reception, engaging in detailed policy discussions while maintaining the personal relationships that had made the educational program so effective. Marcus observed how the prince balanced his roles as royal representative and passionate advocate, using his position to amplify the voices of program participants rather than overshadowing their expertise and leadership. The reception also provided an opportunity for Marcus to observe the long-term impact of the educational program on participating families. Parents who had initially been hesitant about their children's academic potential now spoke confidently about university plans and career aspirations. Siblings of program participants had learned sign language and become advocates for inclusion in their own schools and communities. Dr. Chen approached Marcus during the reception to share preliminary data about the program's influence on educational policies in other countries. International delegations had visited the Deaf Education Center to study its methods, and several nations were implementing similar programs based on the research and advocacy model that had been developed through Prince Louis's initiative. The global impact has exceeded our most optimistic projections, Dr. Pa Chen explained. University researchers are citing our program as evidence for policy recommendations, and international disability rights organizations are using our data to advocate for improved educational resources in their own countries. This international influence represented perhaps the most significant long-term outcome of Prince Louis's commitment to deaf education advocacy. What had begun as a personal charitable project had evolved into a model for social change that was influencing policy decisions and educational practices worldwide. The prince's willingness to invest deeply in understanding complex social issues and working collaboratively with affected communities had created sustainable improvements that would benefit future generations. As the reception concluded and the participants began to depart, Marcus reflected on the remarkable journey that had begun with mysterious hand signals and evolved into transformational social change. Prince Louis's secret code had indeed been cracked, but the solution had revealed not a security threat, but rather a prince with the vision and commitment to address important social justice issues through sustained advocacy and community partnership. The investigation that had started with concern about unauthorized communication had ultimately demonstrated the power of authentic leadership to create positive change when combined with genuine respect for affected communities and dedication to evidence-based solutions. Marcus felt privileged to have played a role in facilitating this important work and looked forward to continuing to support Prince Louis's evolving role as a leader committed to social justice and inclusion. The mystery of the secret hand signals had been solved, but their discovery had opened up much larger questions about the potential for royal leadership to address social problems and create lasting positive change. Prince Louis had provided compelling answers to these questions through his educational advocacy work, and the success of his approach offered hope that future royal leadership could continue to serve as a force for justice and social progress. As Marcus prepared his final report on the year-long development of the deaf education program, he realized that the greatest security threat he had initially imagined had actually been the possibility that Prince Louis's commitment to social justice might be limited by traditional royal protocols. The real revelation had been discovering a prince who was willing to challenge those limitations in service of meaningful social change. And Marcus's job had become supporting and protecting that important work rather than restricting it. The secret code had been cracked, the mystery solved, and the result had been not the end of a security investigation, but the beginning of a new model for royal leadership that combined traditional duties with authentic commitment to addressing the real challenges faced by the people Prince Louis would someday serve as king. Marcus looked forward to continuing to support this important evolution in royal service and to protecting a prince who had demonstrated that true leadership required not just maintaining tradition, but also having the courage to create positive change when it was needed most.